Elena moved like a ghost through the opulent ballroom, a tray of sparkling wine clutched in her hands. Velvet ropes and hushed whispers couldn't hide the disdain in the hotel manager's sharp gaze. Slowly, "Elena, don't you dare mark this $1 million carpet," a sneering guest muttered. "Is this the service we pay for in a VIP suite?" Elena's head bowed, her presence as faint as a fading echo. Just then, Mr. Tanaka, the famed Japanese magnate, swept in, his words a rapid-fire torrent that left everyone utterly bewildered. A hush fell, tension tightening its grip as his brow furrowed with growing frustration. What could he be saying? Elena, with a grace born of deep respect, curtsied low, then spoke. Her Japanese flowed, pure and effortless, but her heart, that morning, had been a leaden weight, heavier even than the tray she now carried. A text from her mother had shattered the dawn's quiet. "Your father's so disappointed you're still doing this. Not a good morning, not a how are you, just that icy judgment." Elena had stared at her phone, her thumb trembling, desperate to lash out, to scream her truth, but she never did, she never could. She tucked her phone away, slipped into her worn gray uniform, and headed to the hotel, the text's cold shadow clinging to her like a shroud. She was used to the crushing expectations of her family, but today it cut deeper. 23 years old, working a job her parents deemed beneath her, in a country far from the grand, marbled halls of her privileged childhood. Couldn't they just let her breathe? The ballroom shimmered with power. Men in tailored suits, women adorned in diamonds that caught the chandelier's dazzling light. Elena moved among them. She'd mastered invisibility early, a defense mechanism from childhood when adults would pat her head and coo. Such a quiet little thing. She'd loathed it then, but now it was her shield. Nobody noticed her unassuming face, her dark hair simply pulled back, her hands roughened by countless hours of cleaning. No one cared, and in a strange way, that was freeing. She wasn't here to be observed. She was here to discover herself, unburdened by external gaze, holding that tray like it's your last hope. Are we? A woman in a sleek crimson dress, nails perfectly matched, snickered, her voice dripping with amusement. Laughter rippled through the nearby guests, their eyes darting to Elena's scuffed shoes. "Don't they teach you to at least look presentable?" she pressed, raising a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. Elena's fingers clenched around the tray, but she moved on, her expression unyielding. She meticulously placed a glass for another guest. The woman in red watched, clearly expecting a reaction, but Elena offered nothing. She simply continued her rounds, her silence a profound retort to their mockery. Then, a man in a crisp tuxedo leaned in, his sharp cologne assaulting her senses. "You don't belong here, sweetheart," he murmured, his voice low, deliberately intimate. "This is for the players, not the cleanup crew." He smirked, adjusting his cufflinks, clearly anticipating her retreat. Elena's hand froze mid-pour, the wine bottle perfectly still. She met his gaze, her eyes calm yet piercing, and simply stated, "I'm working." Her soft words held an undeniable weight that made him recoil, his smug grin faltering. She finished pouring, turned, and walked away, leaving him staring, his expensive cufflinks now seeming utterly pointless. "Hey you," a voice barked, sharp and sudden. It was Brenda, the hotel manager, a wiry woman with a perpetually pursed mouth, her name tag practically screaming Brenda. She swooped in, her minty breath hot on Elena's ear. "Your uniform's wrinkled. How embarrassing. Fix it before you disgrace us all." Elena merely nodded, her face a mask. She shifted the tray, smoothing her skirt with her free hand. Brenda didn't budge, her eyes narrowed. "First night on the late shift, huh?" The young server with slicked back hair chimed in from the bar, a smirk playing on his lips, as if he'd caught her in some transgression. Elena ignored him, her shoes gliding silently across the plush carpet. A red-faced American guest, his Rolex gleaming like a warning, impatiently beckoned her over. "Wine," he grunted, not even bothering to look at her. She poured, the ruby liquid catching the light, her hand unwavering. He finally glanced up, a frown deepening. "I can't stand clumsy staff near my table. Send someone else." His voice carried, drawing unwanted attention. Elena's jaw tightened, but she simply nodded, stepping back. The room suddenly felt colder, choked with judgment. She stood by the wall, her tray steady, her eyes sweeping over the crowd. She saw it all, The fake smiles, the fleeting glances, the silent assessments. She'd grown up in rooms just like this. But back then, she'd been on the other side of the tray. A sudden clink. A tall man with a silk tie and a self-satisfied grin had deliberately knocked his fork to the floor. He pointed at Elena. "Pick it up," he commanded, loud enough for everyone at his table to hear. "That's what you're here for, right?" Chuckles echoed, eyes fixed on her. Elena set her tray down, knelt and retrieved the fork with fluid grace. As she rose, the man leaned back, his smirk returning. "Careful now. Wouldn't want you to trip and ruin that carpet." The laughter grew, sharp and cruel. Elena placed the fork on the table, her face calm, her eyes meeting his in a brief, unyielding challenge, before she stepped away. Then the doors swung open again, and Mr. Tanaka re-entered. He was older, perhaps 60, his face etched like ancient stone. His suit was simple, yet impeccably tailored, his presence radiating an authority that dwarfed everyone else. He offered a slight bow. "Good evening," he said in Japanese, his voice deep. Then, he launched into a complex, rhythmic discourse, filled with intricate business jargon, mergers, assets, timelines. The American billionaires shifted uncomfortably, their faces blank. One leaned to his neighbor, whispering, "What on earth is he talking about?" The room grew taut, the silence stretching. Mr. Tanaka's frown deepened, his hands clasped tightly. Elena stood motionless, her tray perfectly balanced, comprehending every single word. Years in Tokyo, studying, listening, immersing herself in the language, until it became a part of her soul, now paid off. She sensed his rising frustration, the subtle shift in his tone from formal to pointed. But no one else did. They simply stared, utterly lost. Brenda, the manager, quickly waved her off. "Don't interfere," she hissed. "You're just the maid." Elena's eyes flickered to Brenda, then back to Mr. Tanaka, her fingers tightening on the tray. The same server from the bar leaned in with a sneer. "Think you understand Japanese? Keep dreaming." His voice was loud enough for others to hear, and a few guests snickered. Elena's chest constricted, but her expression remained serene. She drew a slow, steady breath, her gaze unwavering. "Does anyone here speak Japanese?" snapped a platinum-haired American woman, with a thin, tight smile, her tone sharp, as if scolding the entire room. Silence. Mr. Tanaka's frown deepened further, his hands still clasped. Standing by the wall, a memory flashed through Elena's mind. 19 years old, in a Tokyo classroom, her professor beaming as she flawlessly translated a complex trade agreement. Her classmates had applauded, their faces alight with admiration. Now in this room, she was nothing more than a pair of hands holding a tray. The contrast burned, a searing pain, but she wouldn't let it show. She adjusted her grip, her knuckles white. Mr. Tanaka's voice grew sharper, his words now about trust and unwavering commitment. She absorbed every nuance, her mind racing to keep pace. A nearby guest coughed, muttering, "Someone get a real translator." Elena's lips pressed into a thin line, but she remained still, waiting. A woman in a gold dress, her lipstick a shade too bright, whispered loudly to her companion, "Look at her standing there, like she's part of this. It's pathetic." The words sliced through the room's hushed hum. Elena's shoulders stiffened, but she didn't turn. She reached for an empty glass, her movements deliberate, her fingers brushing the delicate stem. The woman continued, her voice rising, "They really should train their staff better." Elena placed the glass on her tray, the clink echoing sharply in the quiet. She met the woman's gaze, steady and calm, and the woman's words faltered, her bright lipstick suddenly appearing grotesque under the harsh lights. Elena stepped forward. She placed her tray on a nearby side table, the glasses chiming softly. She executed a deep, formal bow, just as she'd learned in Tokyo. Then she spoke, her voice clear and strong, her Japanese absolutely perfect. She repeated Miss Tanaka's exact words, translating them into precise, professional English. "Mr. Tanaka is proposing a joint venture with your firms, focusing on sustainable energy. He requests a commitment to reduce emissions by 30% within 5 years. The room fell utterly silent. Not a single tremor shook her voice. Mr. Tanaka paused, his eyes widening in surprise. Then for the very first time he smiled. The atmosphere shifted, as if a storm had finally broken. The American guests gaped, their mouths half open. Brenda, the manager, stammered, You really speak Japanese?" Her voice was high, almost accusatory. Elena didn't reply, simply continuing her translation, as Mr. Tanaka spoke again, her words mirroring his rhythm. The American guest with the Rolex muttered, "No way, that language is unbelievably hard." His voice was low, but it still carried. The server from the bar forced a laugh. She probably just memorized a few phrases. Elena's eyes never wavered. She continued, her voice calm, employing negotiation-level phrasing that completely silenced the room. A woman at the table, her earrings glittering like miniature chandeliers, leaned forward. "Where did you even learn that?" she demanded, her tone sharp with disbelief. "You don't look like you've been anywhere near Japan." The words felt like a slap, and the room held its collective breath. Elena paused, her hands briefly folding in front of her. She tilted her head slightly, her gaze steady. "I learned," she stated simply, then turned back to Mr. Tanaka, translating his next point regarding funding timeline. The woman's face flushed crimson, her earrings catching the light as she sank back, utterly speechless. Mr. Tanaka chuckled, a warm, unexpected sound. He turned to the Americans. "She has just conveyed my entire request with complete accuracy. Not a single word was missed." One guest nearly dropped his wine glass, liquid sloshing precariously. Brenda's face went white, her hands nervously twisting together. Another staff member, a woman with weary eyes, whispered to the server, "She's no ordinary maid, is she?" Elena bowed once more, her face serene, her hands perfectly steady. The tension in the room evaporated, replaced by a quiet, burgeoning awe. But the room wasn't finished testing her. A man in a navy suit, his cufflinks flashing, stood abruptly, his voice booming. "This is a private meeting," he declared, pointing at Elena. "Staff don't speak here. Get back to your job." His words were meant to crush her, to force her back into her place, and a few guests nodded, their faces tight with agreement. Elena didn't move. She looked at him, her eyes clear, and simply said, "I'm helping." Two quiet words, soft yet resolute. The man blinked, his hand dropping. Mr. Tanaka raised a hand, silencing the room, and then nodded at Elena, an unmistakable signal to continue. The man slowly sat down, his cufflinks now appearing rather dull in the light. Mr. Tanaka's subsequent words were about risk management, and Elena translated them with the same unwavering precision. A guest, a woman with a pearl necklace and a clipped, dismissive voice, interrupted. "You're not on the guest list," she stated, her eyes narrowed. "How do we know you're not just fabricating all this?" The accusation hung heavy, sharp and ugly, in the air. Elena's hands stilled, but her composure remained absolute. She turned to Mr. Tan, bowed slightly, and inquired in Japanese, "Would you like me to elaborate on your terms for her?" He nodded, his eyes sparkling with approval. She spoke again, her English crisp, effortlessly dismantling the woman's doubt with a single clear sentence about liability clauses. The woman's pearls seemed to tighten around her neck as she slowly sank back into her chair. A young man, barely older than Elena, with a flashy watch and a nervous laugh, piped up, "Come on, this has to be a fluke," he stammered, his voice cracking. "She's probably just repeating something she heard online." The room stirred, a few heads nodding in agreement. Elena's eyes flicked to him, her expression unreadable. She reached into her apron pocket, pulling out a small, worn notebook. She opened it, revealing meticulous, handwritten Japanese characters, years of dedicated study. She held it up just long enough for the room to see, then quietly put it away. The young man's nervous laugh died, his expensive watch suddenly looking ridiculously oversized on his wrist. But not everyone was ready to concede. A sharp-eyed young American billionaire, lean and arrogant, crossed his arms. "You're not an official interpreter," he declared, his voice loud, as if trying to reassert control. "Without diplomatic credentials, you're merely staff." Brenda nodded, her confidence slowly creeping back. "Tomorrow," she sneered, "you'll still be cleaning rooms." The words hung heavy, intended to wound. Elena didn't flinch. She offered a soft, unshaken smile. Mr. Tanaka opened his briefcase, the leather creaking softly. He deliberately pulled out an envelope. He spoke slowly, his English careful but clear. She is my former student, top of her class in international translation at the University of Tokyo. He slid a photograph from the envelope, holding it aloft. It showed Elena, younger, radiant in a cap and gown, clutching a diploma on a stage. The room froze. He continued, she declined a lucrative corporate position because she wished to experience an ordinary life in America. The young billionaire's arms fell limp. Brenda's mouth dropped open, then snapped shut. Every trace of scorn vanished, replaced by a stunned, gaping silence. Elena straightened, finally raising her head to survey the room. Her eyes held no anger, no triumph, only a quiet clarity. She saw them now, truly saw them, just as they had once seen her. Brenda, the manager, stepped forward, trembling. "I'm so sorry," she mumbled, bowing awkwardly. The server from the bar retreated, his gaze fixed on the floor. The American guest with the Rolex cleared his throat, muttering, "We've just made utter fools of ourselves, in front of a hidden genius." The room subtly shifted, the air now thick with a profound respect. A new server, a young woman with a nervous smile, passed by and accidentally dropped a stack of napkins near Elena's feet. Every eye in the room turned, waiting for Elena to bend, to once again play the part of the maid. Instead, she stepped back, her gaze steady, and said, "You've got this." The server blushed crimson, scrambling to pick them up. A guest whispered, "She's not even pretending anymore." Elena's lips curved slightly, not a wide smile, but an acknowledgement of the monumental shift. She was no longer invisible. Mr. Tanaka handed her a pen, gesturing towards a document. She signed it, her name flowing in practiced, elegant strokes. Mr. Tanaka then moved to the center of the room, his voice firm and resonant. "From this moment forward, she will stand by my side for all negotiations in the United States." He signed another document, the pen scratching loudly in the quiet room. It officially appointed Elena as his language and strategy consultant. Brenda's knees buckled, and she instinctively clutched the edge of a table. The VIP guests slowly rose, their applause tentative at first, then growing into a steady, resounding ovation. Elena bowed slightly, her gaze calm, her presence undeniable. The invisible maid had, in a single night, become the most powerful person in the room. An older guest, his silver hair immaculate, his tie perfectly knotted, approached Elena as the applause faded. "You should be so grateful for this opportunity," he said, his tone condescending, as if imparting profound wisdom. "Most people like you never get noticed." The room fell silent, watching intently. Elena tilted her head, her eyes unwavering. She smoothly handed him an empty glass from her still-present tray. "I'm not most people," she stated softly, yet with absolute clarity. She turned away, leaving him standing there, holding the empty glass, his tie suddenly feeling too tight, his patronizing words utterly forgotten. The night, however, didn't conclude with applause. It lingered, a heavy, tangible reality. Elena picked up her tray again, not out of obligation, but because it was hers to carry. She moved through the room, pouring wine for guests, who now conspicuously avoided her gaze. The young billionaire, who'd scoffed at her credentials, stood by the bar, frantically scrolling on his phone. Later that very night, a viral post erupted, an anonymous tip exposing his shady business dealings. By morning, his firm's stock plummeted, and his name was trending for all the wrong reasons. Brenda, the manager, fared no better. The hotel's owner, a close friend of Miss Tanaka, received a discreet call about her abysmal behavior. She was dismissed the very next day, her name tag left forlornly on her desk. The slick-haired server lost his shifts after a flood of guest complaints about his appalling attitude. Within a week, he was back to buzzing tables at a greasy diner. No one explicitly named Elena, but everyone knew. Truth, after all, has a quiet, yet relentless way of catching up. Elena didn't linger to witness the fallout. She completed her shift, clocked out, and stepped into the cool, vibrant New York night. The city hummed around her, taxis blaring, lights flashing, a ceaseless tide of hurried strangers. She pulled her coat tighter, her breath pluming visible in the crisp air. A memory, unbidden, surfaced. 16 years old, standing in her family's grand estate, her father's voice echoing,
You'll never survive without us. She had met his gaze, her hands steady, and declared. The very next year, she had left for Tokyo, carrying only a small suitcase and an unbreakable promise to herself. A street musician played nearby, the mournful notes of a saxophone drifting through the urban symphony. Elena paused, her coffee cup a warm comfort in her hand. The melody was hauntingly familiar, something she'd often heard late at night in Tokyo after her classes. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the music wash over her. It wasn't meant for her, yet it felt deeply personal. She dropped a few dollars into the musician's worn velvet case, her fingers lightly brushing the fabric. He nodded without looking up, and she walked on, the notes slowly fading behind her. Back in the present, she stopped at a corner store, buying another coffee to warm her hand. The cashier, an older woman with kind, knowing eyes, smiled. Rough night, honey. Elena returned a soft, genuine smile. It was all right, she said, and truly meant it. She sipped her coffee, walking slowly, the city's pulse now perfectly attuned to her own. She no longer needed to prove anything, not to her family, not to that room full of billionaires, not even to herself. She had proven it already, in every quiet, resolute step she took. The following day, Mr. Tanaka's team called. They offered her a corner office, an impressive title, a salary that made her eyes widen in disbelief. She listened, her phone pressed to her ear, gazing out her small apartment window at children playing in the street, their laughter sharp and carefree. She thought of the tray, its familiar weight grounding her. She thought of the hotel, how it had both concealed and then revealed her, how she had stepped out of that profound shadow. I'll consider it, she said, and gently hung up. Weeks later she returned to the very same hotel, not as a maid, but as a distinguished guest. She wore a simple black dress, her hair flowing freely, her face unadorned. The new manager, recognizing her, offered a nervous, deferential smile. Elena nodded, her eyes kind, yet distantly knowing. She was there for a meeting she had arranged. Mr. Tanaka had honored his word. She was now his trusted advisor, her name proudly displayed on the door of every negotiation. Yet, she hadn't changed. She still moved with quiet purpose, still listened more intently than she spoke, still carried herself with the assuredness of someone who understood her own profound worth. The young woman, a brand new server, approached Elena with a tray of water, her hands trembling, her eyes wide with awe. You're her, aren't you? She whispered, barely audible. Elena tilted her head, her smile gentle. Just here for the meeting, she replied, taking a glass. The server lingered, then blurted out, You give me hope. Elena paused, her fingers still on the glass. She nodded, her eyes radiating warmth, and the server walked away, her steps noticeably steady. This time the meeting room was smaller, the stakes perhaps lower, but the faces were tragically familiar, sharp, calculating, quick to judge. The young executive leaned back, a smug smirk plastered across his face. So, you're the translator? He asked, his tone dripping with condescension. Elena met his gaze, her own steady and unwavering. I'm the advisor, she corrected calmly. He blinked, then quickly looked away. The meeting continued, and she spoke only when necessary, her words precise, her presence utterly undeniable. No one dared to question her again. Her husband arrived late. He was quiet, much like her, his suit understated yet impeccably sharp. He didn't need to speak much. His name alone commanded immense respect. When he walked in, the entire room subtly shifted. The smirking executive froze, his pen hovering mid-scribble. Another guest, an older woman, averted her gaze, her face suddenly tight with discomfort. No one uttered his name, but they all knew. He stood beside Elena, his hand gently brushing hers, a silent, powerful anchor. She didn't need saving, she never had, but his presence silently proclaimed, she is seen, she is known, she is valued. The meeting concluded, and they left together, her hands securely in his. The hotel lobby still gleamed, the very same carpet she'd once been warned not to spill on. She glanced at it, a faint smile touching her lip. The world had irrevocably shifted, but she remained true to herself. She was still Elena, still quiet, still steady. The profound difference was that now, they truly saw her, and that finally, was enough. A week later, a photo went viral online. It was Elena standing composed beside Miss Tanaka mid-negotiation, her face calm and intensely focused. The caption read, "The maid who changed the game." Comments flooded in, some kind, some viciously bitter. Elena didn't read them. She was at a cozy diner, sharing fries with her husband, dissolving into laughter over something witty he'd said. The world could chatter all it wanted. She didn't need to listen. The consequences continued to ripple, silent yet inevitable. The young executive lost his lucrative sponsorship deal after his smug smirk, captured in a phone video, went viral. The older woman who'd averted her gaze was abruptly dropped by her firm when her emails, filled with cruel, snide comments about staff, mysteriously leaked. These weren't dramatic, sudden falls, but rather the relentless, slow grind of truth finally catching up. Elena didn't watch the news, didn't scroll through the posts. She didn't need to. She simply kept walking, her steps certain, her silence now a powerful roar. In the end, it was never about the room, the tray, or the cutting words. It was about the immense weight she had carried, the strength with which she had held it, and the quiet dignity with which she had ultimately set it down. She had been judged, mocked, dismissed, but she had stood unyielding, calm and unshaken, her dignity fiercely her own. And that, truly, was the lingering truth, heavier and more profound than any fleeting applause.